I really wanted this to be a background mashup of like Indigenous data sovereignty, because I think, although I see many of my MBIOS 600 students, I think that that is something that we need to talk about often and a lot. And we should all as a community get really comfortable around what saying these words, Indigenous data sovereignty. So that is like a big background piece. But then the second half, which I really hope I get to, is about like the trials and tribulations of how my lab has been trying to do this. And I think that's honestly a space where we're at right now. I mean, this is an active conversation we're having within C-MΑIKI about how do we incorporate these meta labels, all of this. Can the meta labels be incorporated? Yeah, so we will see. So first of all, yeah, don't worry. If I go really fast, I'm going to share my slides. But I like to have interactive participation. So we're going to get started. It's a good place to start, which is thinking about what are your conceptions about data. So yes, please get out your smartphones, go to, or your laptops, go to menti.com, type in this code, and you should be able to see, and hopefully with the power of technology, I can make this happen. We will see. Okay, I'm gonna try it right now. We'll see what happens. I don't know. Okay, it was working earlier, but oh yeah, the Menti code is right up here. 14903799. So you can put it in and it's going to make a beautiful bubble cloud, like a word cloud. So yeah, don't put in information. That's what somebody else put in. Or maybe if it is what you think of it is. So what is data? So menti.com 14903799. And it's always fun to think about like, what do other people in the room think data is? Okay, so we've got information and numbers. Hopefully this will work. Uh-oh. Okay, story, okay. Yes, okay, I don't know, maybe the internet's slow. So, okay, measurements, information, stories, figures. And I should say, if what you think is on here is good, that's good. But if you want to add to it, and as you know, the bigger the word, the more people are like agreeing with you. So, okay, representation of reality. Holy cow. Machine generated. Okay, I'm worried for you. Street stories, knowledge. Okay, cool, cool, cool. I think we're all like kind of honing in on measurements, information, knowledge. There's a big camp of quantitative over here. All right. Okay. I'm going to shut it down in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, okay. Here we go. We're going back to, hopefully this works again. Oh, okay. Oh, wait, shoot. Darn it. Okay. This is like what happens. Okay. So the mainstream definition from our friend Merriam-Webster is that data are measurements or statistics used as a basis for reasoning, discussion, or calculation or modeling. All right. The next question is, and this is, again, if you go to the next in your Menti, who should have access to the data that you generate? We just had an announcement that if you don't get your stuff off of COA, it's going to be like some of that data is going to be public to everybody in our internal group. All right, let's see if I can make this happen again. All right, let's see.
Does the you refer to like us as the researcher or all data in general? That's all data gets.
Oh, it's as you interpret it.
Okay.
Everybody.
Oh, no.
Stakeholders. Okay, okay. The community. Somebody's been in my MBIOS 600 class. Depends, everyone. What I love is usually it starts off with everybody, and then as we kind of like adjust to what other people are putting into the conversation, it kind of tends to shift. Researchers, depends on what the data is. Me, the PI. Let me like scroll down and see if I can get more of this. No, wait. Okay, oh, here we go, here we go. Those who contributed knowledge, effort, or funding. Okay. Scientific community, those inflicted or related, the beneficiaries. So this is very interesting. So in this room, we have a very strong, everybody should be able to do it. I don't know who the community is, but that's interesting. We have researchers depends. Depends is a small, but there's a couple of people in there. Who contributed the knowledge, those inflicted. That's a very interesting word. And the beneficiaries, I would group these two together. Okay, so that's where this room is right now. And so that's a good check to me. that helps me to figure out where we are and how open you might be to what I'm about to share. And I'm going to say, please be open to what I'm going to share with you. Okay, this is good. And this information actually gets kept. So it's a fun exercise to kind of do and see how people shift over time. All right. We're going to talk about what are indigenous data. So first I'm going to define indigenous data, then I'm going to define sovereignty, and we're going to put it together. Okay, so indigenous data are data, which we just figured out what that was, but it's also information and knowledge in any format that impacts indigenous peoples, nations, and communities, both at the individual and collective level. And whether or not you know this, like, I mean, this stuff, like the bins of what they are, they fall into broadly 3 big bins. And this is applicable both if you are indigenous and if you're not. Like, this is data that is being collected about you at the government level, at like the science researcher level. This is data that's being collected about us. So I think this is kind of what we might identify as data about us as individuals, right? Administrative, legal, that's like HIPAA, FERPA, you gotta be real careful. Social, commercial, corporate, maybe this is what Facebook and Meta are collecting about you. I think we're also very aware of this one, data about us as collectives. Maybe for Native people, it's traditional and cultural information, languages, knowledge systems, ancestral and clan. But what you might not know, or maybe you kind of know, but you don't know, is also data about our non-human relations is indigenous data as well. So likely that means if you sit with that, all of us are collecting indigenous data as part of our research. So the lands, waters, geology, titles, the air, the soil, the sacred ecosystems, the territories, the plants and animals. These all fall under the bin of indigenous data. And indigenous peoples, I think it's important to also recognize, have always been experts at creating and storing the knowledge about their natural systems, right? Very much they have been, knowledge. I don't know if you would call them scientists, because the word science is like a Western concept, but they were definitely knowledge makers. And then they put that information into physical form to transmit that to subsequent generations. So these are just examples of what some people might consider art, but actually hold a ton of information. So you have in the Pacific Northwest, right? You have totem poles, which hold information about historical events, phenomenon, people, just things that important stories that might just sound like stories, but might have very important information about that environment. We have here a very ancient map that was done on a piece of animal skin that tells the story of migratory peoples, in this case in Europe. This is a beaded quilt. This is a beaded shell kind of, it's a very beautiful piece of art, but it also signifies actually how nations relate to each other. Here you have what looks like a stick. Again, I'm just like giving you different impressions, but in actuality, it also tells the story of how societies can get from place to place and migrate. Okay, so these are ways that Native peoples, if they don't want to put stuff in a journal article, might convey information. So again, as I said, indigenous data, information, any format. I think it's important for us to kind of adjust, especially for this group, and thinking about what is data and who should have access to it. What I'm going to call it, you might have heard it called Western science. I'm going to call it settler colonial science, and compare that to what you might have heard being called indigenous knowledge or traditional ecological knowledge, just the way that Native peoples might make knowledge. Okay, in our survey, when I asked you folks, what is data, right? Most of you said quantitative. So I think that's one thing that differentiates, and again, I'm not making like positive, negative stuff, but it differentiates what people think of as Western or colonial science from can be qualitative and quantitative. This one I think is pretty important. Who is doing the science? So in Western science, the observations are made by a small group of professionals, us, right? Trained scientists who know how to use the instruments, and we do things. One thing that I think is very interesting about Native science or Native knowledge making is that the people who are creating that knowledge are often the resource users themselves. They're the farmers, they're the fishermen, they are the hula dancers who are like, have to go out and gather, right? So they are the people who are actually using it as opposed to an esoteric group of people who we then go and inform the broader public about. Again, I'm not making any like judgments about it. I'm just saying this is like observations that you could take. Synchronic data as opposed to diachronic data. When I'm talking about synchronic data, I'm talking about the fact that when we design our experiments, we're not there all the time, right? We have time points. We're like, we're going to go out once a month, or we're going to go out once a quarter, or we're going to go out once a year, and we're going to take these measurements. Whereas diachronic data tends to be multi-generational data. My grandfather taught me how to fish. He passed it on to me, but also you're like out there every day, right? So the utility of statistics becomes a really interesting conversation. We utilize statistics because we aren't there every single day. We have to take an average versus if people are there every day, they like really have a sense of what's going on because they were there yesterday, they're there today. They're not making inferences necessarily. They're building their knowledge up on accumulated data. Okay. And then there's this whole argument about like Western science is objective. We can go really far. Let me just like leave this one word here. And I would say that indigenous knowledge making is inherently subjective. Like you have to be a resource user to be able to really feel like you have the ability to make prescriptions or descriptions about things, right? Like oftentimes it's like if you're not a fisherman, maybe you shouldn't talk about fish. Maybe you should talk about like you're a farmer, so go talk about taro or something like that. So it is very subjective and based on your lived experience. I would actually argue that we're pretty subjective too, but we'll just give them objective. And then the other thing, which is the point of today's talk, is knowledge is often held by individuals and institutions, ownership of it. Whereas in the case here, knowledge is held by the collective. I spend so much time going over this slide because I think this is exactly why when we have Native folks and scientists meeting together and we have like issues, it's because of these fundamental differences. These fundamental differences that derive from everybody's cultures. Okay, so that will help us. All right, so that was data and indigenous data. Let's talk about sovereignty. So I'm going to be very specific to the United States. In the US, right, tribal sovereignty is how Native peoples are able to claim their sovereignty. It's the rights of recognized tribes, federally recognized tribes, to govern themselves. And what happens is that then Native nations are responsible for what happens on their land. So in this case, we're just basically saying sovereignty is self-determination. And the extent to which they can enforce their own rules, that's sovereignty, okay? So now when we like put it together then, if sovereignty is this, it makes data sovereignty is a type of sovereignty. So it derives from this, which you can see then if we're talking about ʻŌiwi or Native Hawaiian data sovereignty, complicated navigational path we're gonna have to take. All right, so when we talk about mainstream data sovereignty, I'm talking about like your personal, whether you're American, Native Hawaiian, or whatever, but in the United States, you have your own personal data sovereignty, right? Like these are the agreements where you're like, yeah, Meta, you can collect my data. Yeah, okay, I want to send my error reports back to my software company so that they can like improve it, right? So data sovereignty is that concept, whether or not you're native, I just want to say, it's that concept that information which has been converted and stored in binary digital form is subject to the laws of whatever country it's located in. So for us, it's the United States of America. Sovereignty and governance often get conflated. Like people often are like talking about one thing, but they really mean data governance. Data governance is the ownership, collection, control, and use of that data. So I think in science, we're talking a lot about this, but we say that a lot. So we should like kind of clarify ourselves. I'm going to also introduce at this point, how many of you guys are familiar with the FAIR principles of like data, findable, accessible, interoperable, repeatable? Okay, so I'm not gonna go over that, but what I'm gonna say is that a group of Native scholars over a period of, I don't know, a long time, but mostly led by this scholar named Stephanie Carroll Russo at the University of Arizona, have come up with CARE principles, which are complementary to FAIR and which pay special attention to this complicated problem of indigenous data sovereignty. So the CARE principles, it's meant to be, the ideal world is like it's fair and care. So care stands for C, collective benefit. And I did hear the word beneficiaries in the when we had the who should have access to our data. So it's the idea that the data ecosystem should be designed and function in ways that enable Indigenous peoples to derive benefit from the data. I'm not going to go into all the subpoints. Again, I'm going to share the slides out. Authority to control. Again, this is like where it gets super dicey with like UH legal. Indigenous people's rights and interests in data must be recognized, and the authority to control the data is respected. These are hard concepts. If this is the first time you're seeing this and you feel like, whoa, that's okay. R is responsibility. Those working with Indigenous data have a responsibility to share how those data are used to support Indigenous people's self-determination, collective benefit. And E, ethics. Indigenous people's rights and well-being should be the primary concern at all stages of the data life cycle and across the data ecosystems. So this is what my lab is trying to achieve. What I've been like, come on, C-MΑIKI, we can get here. But the problem is when the rubber meets the road and we're like actually doing this is really hard to do. You can be like super like, I want to do it. I have the best intentions. This is really hard to do. So I'm going to like share with you some like issues that we're facing along the way and some things that my lab is like trying to do. We'll see. We'll see if we get there. Okay. One of the things we have to do if we're going to try and get to care is we have to like understand this whole landscape environment of what's going on at the federal level, the state, like what's Hawaii, what's going on. Part of that is to figure out, because what we're talking about is transformation. This figure is really just very much like, if you're trying to change something in science, these are the considerations. So on this side, we have scales of organizational complexity, right? Like there's you and me, there's my lab, there's like ASM, this is like UH, this is NSF, NIH, this is like the United States, this is like the UN kind of a thing. And it's basically this recognition that the responsiveness to change is way easier on this scale than on that scale. But this is like the levels that our goals are trying to get to. So today I'm going to focus on these 3 areas just to kind of get us some background on what we're talking about when we're trying to approach care and like what are our options. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. At the governmental level, I'm going to talk very briefly about like international national policies that exist for Native Hawaiians to claim Indigenous data sovereignty, Hawaii specifically. And then I'm going to go into like what's up with UH. And then I'm going to try and like get to like what my lab is trying to do and like the partners that we work with and how successful or like sort of successful we're being. Hopefully I get through all of it. If not, I can come back and give another seminar. Okay, so I think when we talk about biology on the international level, we know that there are protocols out there, right, that we're always supposed to follow that have to do with like, DNA and the collection of DNA. But what I would also say, and again, like I said, this is like there's a lot of words here. You can read this later. But the basic idea is that the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, also known as UNDRIP, basically states that we have the right to control, protect, and develop our culture and its associated IP. So the first level at this international level, mind you, maybe the US is not like cool with the UN and they're gonna like do their own council, but at the international level, we do have rights that we can attach onto. Article 27, same document, encourages states to work with Indigenous peoples to adjudicate their rights to their traditional resources. You can like read all of this here. Article 11, Section 2 states that Indigenous peoples have restitution for IP taken without free, prior, or informed consent, or in violation of traditional laws and customs. So at the international level, it would seem that Native Hawaiians do have a case for saying, hey guys, we're in Hawaii, folks are collecting our data, we should be having a conversation, we should have a dialogue about this. Okay, let's talk about the national level. Well, okay, just really quick lesson, because we're not in like Hawaiian Studies 107 or anything like that. But just to remind you that the Hawaiian Kingdom, it was an Indigenous-led nation, which had challenges to its sovereignty. Basically, if we start here, this is like Chief of Wartime for those of you watching, unification. Then we have Kamehameha dies and the kapu system falls apart. That's called the Ainoa. Here we have Kamehameha III. He is like, let's get a constitution together. Let's like westernized so that people can like see us and think like, okay, we can understand their governance system. Sovereignty was taken away from, then returned. Then we have the introduction of the concept of private property. That's important because that tells us that private property, which is, derived from what is going to eventually be intellectual property, we have some sense of that in Hawaii. Then we have more troubles. This is Kalakaua. And then we have the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom, January 17th, the illegal annexation of Hawaii because there was no treaty of annexation, and then statehood. Okay, so that's, in red, I have our clash with the United States. Important to note that Native Hawaiians do not have federal recognition. Okay, I have folded that into a timeline of United States policies towards Native people, which is not great. But basically, you can see that we are just par for the course for what was a pattern of disempowerment for Indigenous folks. So you have Indian Removal Act, the Homestead Act, the Mining Law. Mind you, these are ones where it's saying, hey, folks, go out and take these lands occupied by after we remove these folks. The Dawes Act, we have the Dawes Commission, then all the stuff that happened to Hawaii. In 1964, we still have Wilderness Act, which is basically declaring wilderness is a place where nobody lives, which just in that one bill basically says Native people don't have a homeland. And then you have your Navajo Hopi Relocation Act. Like, I find this crazy that still in the 70s, people were actively being relocated off of their lands. Okay, this is where we're at. Native Hawaiians don't have federal recognition. We have international stuff. How are we going to do this indigenous data sovereignty? This becomes the problem that ends up with everything from crazy Ho'oponopono TikTok to like using the Kamehameha statue to do like tourism to people saying you can't use the word aloha or poke because I'm going to copyright aloha poke. I'm going to trademark it because we don't have a clear governance system that protects Hawaiian knowledge. All the way to, yes, we're going to go down there. We're going to talk about UH's role and some of the things that we've done, like trying to patent kalo, the staff of life. Or more recently, maybe you did or maybe you didn't know this, for those of you who work with limu, hey, these companies here just discovered a seaweed diet that helped cows fart less, and that's a really big and important problem in terms of climate change, because cows produce a lot of methane. The limu that they found, because they tested all kinds of limu, or I guess macroalgae, is limu kohu. So now what? Does that mean like we gotta like grow out limu kohu? We gotta like plant it everywhere? That's not so great for Hawaiian ecosystems. Okay, and never mind all of these other random kind of examples. But basically, there's a lot of problems out there with who owns Hawaiian knowledge. Okay, friends, but we do have rights. We may not have rights under the nation of the United States, but we do have rights in the state of Hawaii. So in 1978, there was a constitutional convention, which was super huge turning point for Native Hawaiians. And basically, in some of these articles that were edited and updated, it provides the protection that basically the state of Hawaii is required to protect natural resources and traditional Hawaiian rights. And that is where we can derive some language about Native Hawaiian data sovereignty or ʻŌiwi data sovereignty. Specifically, Article 11, Section 1 and Article 12, Section 7, reaffirming traditional rights. The other place that we can look to is this really, I would say Hawaii has a really, really unique, because it came from a kingdom that was overthrown. Our laws are super different from anywhere else in the United States. The other one is Hawaii Revised Statutes, Section, Article 1, Section 1. Like the very first line is this one, which I think is so kind of cool, which is the common law of England as ascertained by the English and American decisions, right? Because we were like an independent nation that like really thought England was cool. So we were like, whoop, English common law. That should be the law of the state of Hawaii in all cases, except as otherwise established by Hawaiian usage. So in other words, if there was already a law in the books under the Kingdom of Hawaii, then we go with that one. So that's really powerful for us to be able to utilize that. Also to know, because we're doing research on ceded lands and whatnot, water, minerals, plants, and other things connected, they are all part of the things that are held in trust and protected. And then this is just Supreme Court law that really talks about the public trust doctrine for protecting native Hawaiian land and traditional and customary uses. Okay. Wait, is that the same slide? Oh yeah, okay. All right. Oh shoot, there was one more that I was gonna do. Anyway, that's okay. We'll move on. So yeah, so we don't have national law, federal law protecting us, but we have a lot of laws at the state level and we have international law. So I would say that given that the University of Hawaii is a state entity, we have good reason to act in accordance with the state laws and kind of open up that discussion. All right, I'm gonna talk about UH and then like lab. All right, this is come straight from the webpage. So UH is like, we are located in verdant Manoa Valley, in the ahupua of Waikiki, in the moku of Kona, on the mokupuni of Oahu, in the Pai'aina of Hawaii, in the center of Wananui'akea. So UH would really like to, I really want to believe, genuinely, would like to become a Native Hawaiian place of learning, as expressed here. And their vision is to be not only a Carnegie Research One level university that is grounded in a Native Hawaiian place of learning. Like what, this is the question. What does that mean? And what does it mean for us as researchers? How do we do research in a way that is in accordance with that? And we want to be a leading light of aloha aina for Hawaii in the world. I think it's important that even if we love UH, it's important for us to address straight on that that we have had a role, the University of Hawaii has had a role in threatening ʻŌiwi knowledge. So this is just a timeline that I put together of like the major landmark kind of timeline of things that have threatened IP. Bet you didn't know this, but in 2002, Disney copyrighted 2 sacred mele for King Kalakaua and Liu'uokalani in the soundtrack to Lilo and Stitch, meaning that if we want to perform it or dance it, we're gonna go talk to Disney. I would say most people in Hawaii, I believe most people don't listen to that, but that was actually a very important timeline step. Okay, then let's talk about what we've done here at UH. 2003 was a banner year. Okay, we've got the Marine Byproducts Engineering Center, I will say in my own department of oceanography. Bioprospecting, they entered agreements with diverse companies for exclusive right to discover genes with intent to commercialize. No language about Native Hawaiian beneficiaries. Then we have Kalo, US Patent Office, issued 3 patents for Hawaiian and Palauan hybrid kalo varieties. Edward Trujillo, who has since passed on, was named the inventor, and UH was the assignee. There's a lot to dig deep here on this. We're not gonna do that today, but we can come back. Then in 2003, at the same time, PBRC, I think, was one of the major, along with other folks at the med school, don't get me wrong, but this is back when PBRC was more affiliated with the med school, proposed to do the Native Hawaiian Genome Project, like sequence Native Hawaiian genomes and find genes that kind of, well, you know, quasi-racial weird theories. In response to all of that, the Native Hawaiian community had a giant gathering called the Ahapono Ka'apono. And they created the Paukalani Declaration, which is really, really good. We should kind of think about that. Then really nothing for almost 20 years when Huanamakahikina came out on the integrity, stewardship, and protection of hula. And finally, in the last year or two, the creation of the Native Hawaiian Intellectual Property Working Group happened. So I would say that I don't think it's an overstatement to say that UH has a big responsibility to kind of figure out what's going on, a lot with regard to ʻŌiwi data sovereignty, or at least with regard to the beneficiaries and how we're doing research. Because 3 of the major kind of waypoints in this come from stuff we did. Okay. But we're microbiome researchers. So what does this mean for us? Okay. So in trying to figure that out and just being like, oh my God, I still want to be at UH, but I'm like feeling really like ethically torn. I was a co-author to try and really bring together concepts of like, how do we do this? How do we work with Indigenous communities in a good way as researchers? And we came up with this relationality map of how we can kind of think about it. And I think the key is here, where Indigenous communities and researchers come together. It's the idea of around creating a collaborative research process, prioritizing the community interests and benefits. Like all of that seems pretty like doable. Really prioritizing the return of results. So people know, what did we find out about them? And then promoting this thing called Indigenous research sovereignty. And when we talk about what is our relationship between Indigenous community and the microbes, right? Like we're not talking about microbiome studies of people themselves. This could be like microbiome studies from like their ahupua'a, their water system, right? They have kinship relationships. How do we increase capacity for them to manage data if we give it back to them? How do we even support Indigenous-led science? Like questions that they have that really talk to the interests that they have so that they can have a better life for their communities and families. All right. This is kind of similar, but this is stuff we're already dealing with, like human subjects training, sample regulating our data, and protecting identifiables. So this is stuff we're familiar with. I think this is the area that we got to grow in. Okay. And then last year, because me and the friends that I work with, we're like, no, we really gotta like get to this. Like, it's great to talk theory, but like, I have data in my lab right now. Like, what am I doing with my data in my lab right now? So we have come up with, and again, this is not a native Hawaiian concept. This was because I was working with other native people. We used very much their for medicine wheel concept. So we need to identify folks who can help guide us on the implementation. We need to assess what our institutional practices are. So that's actually something that I'm working on. And I think we are working on in C-MΑIKI actually. So how do we do things? How do we align this policy with this new perspective of like, we don't want to be jerks? And then side by side, how do we provide training and cultural awareness, right? I think all of you know we're like in this process. All right, we also have to think about how do we think about establishing agreements with Indigenous peoples? How do we develop the right for, reviewing names, all this land acknowledgement? So we're in that. I think C-MAIKI is doing a good job here. And then the management, this is literally where we're at now with the new upgrade, applying metadata labels. How do we adopt meta standards for correct annotation? How can we enhance APIs for permission-based data access? And how do we increase the visibility of those traditional stewards from those places where we collect the data? And then finally, in terms of this, how do we engage? We're calling them data hosts, like us as well as the people we're collecting the data from. How can we maybe even amend citation guidance? And then we need to build this in more broadly as an educational thing, which those of you who are in Bio 600, like you are these people right here. And then encouraging ethical attribution and reuse. So this is kind of like what we're going for. At the University of Hawaii specifically, we have tried to start some of this. Those of you who were in MBio 600 know that we have built a whole course to try to have us get to think about how we conduct ethical relationships and responsibilities. This is the QR code. You guys can access this later. But basically, we have identified 8 kulana or 8 different considerations or stances when you're developing your research project that you should kind of like walk yourself through and discuss with those you're doing research with. I'm not going to go any further. I can like come back and just do a whole thing on kulana no i'i. But the main thing to know is it's not a checklist, okay? It's very much, this kulana no i'i is a set of values. It's values-based, it's behavioral-based, and it's very much based in Hawaii. We developed kulana no i'i in Hawaii, for Hawaii, by Hawaii people, so that we could do research. It's actually a little bit hard to translate to other places. And folks have come and been like, let's do kulana no i'i in Maryland. And I'm like, that's not gonna work. And I also want to say you have to apply it along hard work and time, but it can be extremely, extremely rewarding. Okay, one particular part of kulana no i'i that I think you might want to examine more if you go and look at the document is our piece on knowledge stewardship. And here are some of the questions that we developed. So kulana no i'i has a bunch of questions that you ask yourself, and then you have conversations with your community partners with if you're going to collect data outside the university. So it's good to sit down and have a conversation about like, what are your values related to research stewardship? It might be implicit. You might have never had to like actually think about it, but you should. Held by the researchers and the community members. What are the values related to knowledge access? How can common values be reinforced and conflicting values be respectfully addressed? Or like not trying to say you have to come to consensus, but the strength really is in the overlap of where you are both like, yeah, we want to support this. What are some consequences of outsized entities accessing information? I think oftentimes when we think about the data life cycle, we're like, I submitted it, it's uploaded to the cloud, let it be. But I think it's important for us in Hawaii, if we're going to take on this additional responsibility of having the privilege of working here, we should think about what happens when other people have access to this data. Government agencies, insurance companies, media, funders, other researchers. How might that information be misused or appropriated? Okay. Whew, that was a lot. Whew. Okay, so yeah, I can come back and talk more about this. Um, and now I'm going to talk more about like, what are we trying to do about this? Empowering our community partners. So the first thing I want to say is, I always like to look at what other people are doing. And there are other models for Indigenous data sharing. And we should think about looking at them and adapting them for what might work here in Hawaii at Manoa. So you have the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation and Oregon State University, Alberta First Nations, as well as the University of Washington. And look, they have like templates that we can use. So I think, and this is just like a first pass, there's more. And there's more and more coming. And so I think one thing that we could even be very cutting edge at University of Hawaii is not only to do a general one, but to think about for C-MΑIKI, like what does the microbiome ones look like? So I think we have a really good opportunity because we have a great collaborative here. I'm basically saying we gotta make tools. So the goal here is why we want to support communities and we want to support researchers to engage in ethical practices. So it's like not only good for the communities, it's good for us. And there's a piece here about really building capacity in our communities for us, for them to increase their understanding. I mean, we got to increase our understanding. I bet most of you did not know the information I just shared with you 20 minutes ago. So there's an opportunity for building capacity all around. And I think when people are like, whoa, this is what the landscape is, I think we can have really powerful conversations. All right. What does my lab do? Okay. We very much have a iterative process where we start by establishing PDNA as relationship and responsibility for people in place. This is like my lab doing field days, various pictures. We meet with the community partners, right? We don't just show up and are like, hey, we want to do research here. We're like showing up and doing work. I think many of you here do that, so that's awesome. Then when we co-design the research, we meet with we do the field work, we do the data analysis, and we share back. So it's basically our general data cycle. Something that we can develop, as I think I'm going to emphasize for the rest of this talk, is tools for this. Not just saying like you got this kulana no i'i thing, but we got to build actual like tools that we can use. So I think it lies a lot in our data management plan, our data storage plan, and maybe even data agreements. And again, we have to talk to UH Legal because who knows how down they will be for this, but I think this is the direction we should go in. Because it provides accountability. I'm not comfortable with the word ownership, but we are working in a Western construct society that does. So we need to create potentially ownership agreements too. Contacts and considerations for that will also be good to have. So these are just kind of some example templates that my center at in Sea Grant has done. But before I tell you, I just need to tell you that UH Legal has said that these are only meant to serve as teaching tools. This is not legal advice. You must seek legal advice with UH Legal before entering into agreement. Okay, now I can tell you what we did. All right. The main elements are, you need to know who is this agreement serving and for how long. What are the data are intended to be collected for the project? See, this is stuff you're already putting into your data management plan. You already got this. This is like before you start the research. How will the data be stored? Who has access? Again, stuff we're already doing, except this time we're sharing it with the community partner. What happens to the data when the project ends? Again, we should probably be thinking about this more. And then areas that need specific work we should attend to is, how do we treat the indigenous knowledge? Who's responsible for the data? And I mean like both us and community partners, and who owns that knowledge and data. Okay, so collection of the knowledge. What data are used? These are, again, like I said, these are our templates for educational purposes, but I do have them in case anybody is interested and wants to look at it. So we've developed, little things like a summary of the data to be collected is as follows, and you fill it in. Who is the group? Who is the community? Indigenous knowledge is often unintentionally collected. Like sometimes you might come up and an uncle might tell you a story and you might be like, oh, that's super interesting. I think that might have an impact on what's going on in my data. Dude, you just collected indigenous knowledge. So, kind of thinking about unintentional things or maybe things that might be misunderstood or mistreated. And it's really important to think that even some of the anecdotal information that we collect should be considered with, care and good stuff. I want to share with you an example of empowering community partners in this way. And the example I'm going to use is ʻŌiwi because I work there a lot. What we did was, and this is work that was done very much and facilitated very much by the ʻŌiwi National Estuarine Research Reserve. The first thing you should do, if you're like, I'm in a community, who is the community? Do a map, figure out who they are and what they do. So this is a map, this is a community map of the players. So you can see we have a lot of different people. We decided to classify them. So we knew like what their role was and how they might be interested. So you see there's a bunch of Hawaiian-led nonprofits. We got HIMB, research unit. We also have agencies, both state entities as well as like public entities. So it's a complicated environment. And then we wanted to figure out like, what is their scope? So what might they be interested in? This is like a good exercise to do. If you're like, I'm rolling up on this community, it's good to kind of like make a little table like this and figure out like who would be the people who would want to know what's going on. And then we physically mapped it to show where people might be, because you're going to take samples. Maybe some days you're here, but some days you're at the fish pond and some days you're out here. And you need to be able to navigate. If somebody from those communities come, you want to know who they are. You want to be like caught by surprise. So this is a good exercise to do. And then one thing we did was utilizing kulana no i'i, we helped, and again, this is like C-MΑIKI, this is Katie Hinson, this is myself working together to transform the kulana no i'i into like, how are people going to actually do work here in this pond? And some of you students know because you have filled this out. We asked specific questions like, are you going to pay for your access to do here? Because it's, sometimes it's a lot of work. How about staff time or boat time? What's your timeline for data sharing? See, remember the data sharing timeline? Yeah, we put it right here. And then, are you willing to share this research with future researchers? Because you're not, as a grad student, you're going to move on. Do you get permission to share geolocation information about your study, just in case? It's a weird question, but like, yeah, we got to ask. And then this is the powerful stuff. And I'll be honest, I don't know if this is legal. I've never asked legal, but we like make everybody do it. I should also say this is situated on the nonprofit side. It's not a UH kind of thing. The nonprofit is saying, if you want to work here, you got to fill this out. But take a look at this. It's going to contribute to the mission. You're going to take precautions to prevent the introduction of alien species. You have to maintain the appropriate permits. You have to be willing to enter into a long-term relationship with us, like come to our work days, volunteer. You have to remove your equipment after you're done. Yeah. The final approval will be required before the studies are published, and they should be acknowledged. This is really comprehensive, and it's accompanied by an initial that you are basically signing. So yeah, I'm gonna skip this. So as I said, another part of the data agreement should be around the sharing, presenting, and dissemination. It's important to commit to a schedule to update the community. sharing data before public presentations. It's the worst thing when you have something that comes out on UH News and your community partner calls you up and is like, you didn't tell us about this and we found out in the newspaper. It totally sucks. Or on the news. A statement that acknowledges this agreement that helps protect data from an unauthorized party or usage. Yeah, the data shouldn't be shared outside the agreement without permission, and it really helps you to stick to the purpose of the project. And what it does is it really brings together that it's the burden's not only on us as the researchers, the burden's also on our community partners, but it's a burden that they want. So here's some examples. We have developed explicit language in our publications. This is a recent publication that came out where, we say this study utilized and generated local generational and indigenous data that belong to the stewards of the Ahupo of Heiʻiahe and Fish Pond. Future use of any and all data requires the express permission of this. So this is the kind of language that you can develop if you work with, clear partners. And then they're just like placeholders for the data that we're going to upload. Okay, so this is what we use. We have boilerplate language now that we put in all of our papers. And then we have discussions beforehand on like, what do you want to share? And we, because it is going to go on GitHub. It is going to go up on Figshare. It is going to go up on NCBI. We've also started engaging with local contacts. And local contacts is a group that have developed and invented like meta labels for using to explicitly clarify like what kind of relationships people have with each other. So we've created, like this is my lab, the Microbiology and Evolution Lab. We've started putting projects up here, and then you basically choose, you have like a menu of different kind of labels that you want to apply to your data. I will say that the shortcoming is that they haven't been able to apply those to like NCBI yet. That's my biggest gripe is I'm like, I want to be able to put this label on whatever I upload to NCBI. So what I end up doing is I end up like adding additional information in the summary box. That's basically this language over here. But when we get to that point, because they're actively working with NCBI to have like a new meta label that says, how does this community want this data to be shared? I will be updating all of that. Okay. Something we also have put into place is authorship. So I created this authorship template where I list everybody who did anything, like undergrads. This is actually good just in general. It doesn't have to be just with community partners. It's a good collaborative tool. What did they, and then this is basically a checkbox. Did they do any of these? Did they design the project? Did they help with sample collecting? Did they help with sample processing, data analysis? Did they provide funding? Were they admins? Did they write? Did they help with editing and feedback? And through that process, this is just an example. In my grad student Becca Lensing's manuscript, that helped us to clearly identify, oh, we need to make these community partners, Keahi, Kinohi, and Kili'i, they have fulfilled a lot of the criteria here, and they meet the standard for authorship. So we use this to like just be very unambiguous. And I think that's something that can be very helpful. All right, but we do all of that, but we didn't feel like it was enough because we've been collecting data in Heiʻia for like 10 plus years. And we really wanted to come up with like an even more, put the data in the hands of the community partners even sooner. So this is the work that we've done with my data scientist, Raz Wakdo. So the goal was that community members could use the data directly without waiting for overwhelmed grad students and researchers to process the data, because we always felt guilty that we were so slow. So, and then depending on what the community wants, external researchers could get access to a fraction maybe of this database. So we call it ETL. I mean, that's actually not what we call it. That's what it's called. Extract, transform, and load. It ingests data from Google Cloud Storage into BigQuery. So we have two pools here. We have archival, it just stays forever. We have this thing that transforms it into a database. And then the cloud tools that we use you can get them through GitHub. That QR code goes to our GitHub page. GitHub hosts the framework. The key is machine readable files and scripts that process it. It's time triggered. Basically, I have a Google Drive folder called Tidy Data. My students put their file into the folder, and once a week, it happens during lab meeting because I'm there. I'm like, did you fucking? So it happens once a week, and then it does this. So once a week, our database gets updated. And they just click and drag their data into the Drive folder, and the rest of it is automated by these cloud tools. So we're actually currently not using COA because we wanted to create a system that our community partners could really access. This is our data sharing pilot. This is the dream. Raz put this together. This is data from ʻŌiwi, and we got express permission from KS to share this data. So it's all clickable. I'm not going to share with you, but this is like a website where our partners can like click on all these different parameters and it shows different things. It's interactive, it's privately hosted with regulated levels of access. And then our partners can directly download the data. So that's what we're currently working on. I won't go through the lessons learned. We can talk about that later. But I just want to end with, this is for the grad students out there. You know this if you're an MBio 600. You have to also be aware yourself and share it with your partners, the statements of institutional data ownership. This comes from Grad Division webpage. I screenshotted it. In general, do you see this? In general, materials developed exclusively by the student are the student's property. But the exception is, if a student develops materials while working as a university employee, then the university may have the right to a share of that IP. And who the heck is a grad student who's not working, an employee of like the University of Hawaii? Like nobody I know. So they've like created this out, but then closed the loophole. So we gotta all be aware of that. The other thing I just want you to all be aware of is if you have an agreement with a community partner, probably the number one document that you'll go and download is this thing called the UH Agreement of Services. We went through and with comments identified the language of that document, which is like really bad for communities. And basically, this is some of the major language that the University of Hawaii shall have complete ownership of all physical material acquired, developed, and prepared or assembled by the contractor, which is often your community partner, pursuant to this agreement. And the problem is, this also can include materials that were collected before that may have been developed prior to the agreement, or So this is really, really dangerous, and we have to work to like change this. And we have, I also have templates for if you want alternative language to this, but I just want to say this is the default template that we're all using right now. So I don't think we're intentionally screwing over people, but like it's happening. And so I just want to like tell you guys all. Okay, I talked too much. That's the end of my talk. But yeah, I want to say basically that UH has extremely limited capacity or infrastructure to support Indigenous knowledge at this time. We need to address the barriers to co-production. And currently I'm working through the EPSCoR to develop some curriculum and practices. And I'm also participating in the NEON working group because they have a lot of money in the game around the data that they're collecting. But I want to say that most of the work to protect Indigenous data sovereignty happens before you even collect a sample. So that's all I got.